Hi guys, this is Avalo here. I hate to have to bring you a video like this, but this is something that needs to be talked about right now because it's getting a little bit out of control, and people that are a little bit, afraid to talk about the actual balance of the game aren't going to actually speak up and say anything. But I'm going to be talking about the state of Terran right now in StarCraft 2, which some people are going to be shaking their heads, oh no, everything's fine, or oh no, you just need to play better. But it's actually, there's a huge problem right now that needs to be addressed, and the reason it's really important that the developers, David Kim, Dustin Browder, actually have to, they need to address this right now is because Heart of the Swarm is really right there on the horizon, and if these things are not brought up and addressed by the developers, or people don't see a need to bring stuff up, especially in the case of Terran late game, they're not going to be addressed. The developers are going to go on, assume everything's fine, and people are, then we'll be complaining about it later in the, down the road when it's too late. The game won't change or get better. So, first off, what I wanted to start with was, I mean, what I'm going to be talking about is especially TvZ, the huge problem there is now with after the Queen buff. But I'll be talking about TVP as well. It's just that if you've noticed in the last 2 weeks, no one's been talking about TVP late game issues, and they're not talking about it because those issues have gone away or anything. It's just that the TvZ has become so much worse. If you can imagine that, TvZ has become so much of a worse matchup overall than even the TVP late game issues that everybody was legitimately complaining about. TvZ is taking the forefront so badly that this stuff has to be talked about, and if no one else is gonna actually put it out there on the table to talk about, then I will. So you can throw all the balance whining stuff at me. That's fine as long as we get the game fixed. I don't really care. So the first thing that I'm going to discuss is, what happened to Terran? Why is Terran being nerfed every single patch, along with the other races being buffed? And a lot of it boils down to the stigma that Terran got from the beta, and a little bit after release. Terran was legitimately overpowered for quite a while. Not in terms of their unit strengths or or actual numbers on the units, but Terran was way too versatile, and we all saw that in the beta, like with 5-Rax Reaper, where you just throw down 5 barracks, build only Reapers, stuff like that. Like Terran was, Terran had so many options. Stimpack was able to be researched so quickly that you could always rush and almost always do damage. But these things, it was mostly in the beta and a bit after release that everything got toned down and it got changed. Well, and also there's the combination of Zerg and Protoss. It took much longer for Zerg and Protoss players to figure out both of their races. It took almost 1.5 to 2 years for Protoss to start using Warp Prisms heavily in their play. We've only just seen heavy Warp Prism play recently. And even now, in Zerg play, there's still not much Nidus Worm usage, and I know people are going to be like, you're the guy that said about Nidus Worms every 5 seconds, but, it's a legitimate thing. That there's stuff that people haven't developed. Mass Queen late game is something that used by Fitzy here has started doing, and a bunch of other Zerg players, but that's only a recent development too, and, it's taken a while for stuff like that. Mass nukes, things... each race is taking a while to develop all of their, using all their strategies and things, but it took Zerg and Protoss much longer to figure out, what they needed to do, and that's partly because in the early days, Terran had so much versatility that games would not always go to late game, and so that, that brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about is Terran late game has never been addressed. Every single patch and every single thing that we've seen has mostly been for Terran early game. The Stimpack nerf, nerfing things like Vikings, which nerfing tanks. It all was for early game or because of the maps, the map sizes. We had a terrible map pool in the beta. That's another huge reason why Terran was really perceptibly stronger in beta, is because the map pool was Blizzard maps. It was all Blizzard maps and all poorly designed maps. And now that the maps have gotten bigger, you know, every little thing is adding up. And Terran late game just never was looked at. It was always the early game issues. It was always these issues. So while Terran early game was always fine and mid game was fine, nothing ever changed overall with Terran late game, patch through patch and patch. And Zerg and Protoss have always had the theoretical best late games. You know, with Warp-In and with Larva Inject. I believe Hotbid wrote an article in the beta about how the exponential growth of Larva Inject compared to Chrono Boost and Mules. But that's another, you know, that's another part of the issue of why TvZ has taken the forefront lately of the balance concerns, because when a Zerg economy is left unchecked, it grows exponentially, like from that article that Hotbid wrote. I'm sure some mathematicians or whatever people can check it, but it grows at a better rate than, you know, Terran and Protoss economies, regardless of the Mule, regardless of Chrono Boost, things like that. So when you leave a Zerg, you know, unchecked and able to build drone up to 70 or 80 drones, and then they build all units, the game there's a problem there, a balance concern. And there was no concern there initially. Pre-Queen buff, Queens were still very strong late game. You could still use Queens late game or whatever if you wanted to, but it wasn't. You could actually damage a Zerg early game as Terran with, you know, Hellions. Another issue was denying creep. So that's the next thing I wanted to go into for the TvZ late game. You know, like I said, nothing. Actually, the one thing that was changed for Terran late game was the Ghost. The first time Terran did find strength in the late game, it was nerfed. So things like that, you know, I think that's the one huge patch that actually did hit Terran late game against Zerg, was the Ghost nerf. Whenever Terrans finally did figure out these things, they were nerfed. And that's another argument that people are trying to use in the forums, like, you just need to figure out how to play again. Terrans have figured out how to play the entire time. Terrans have been the most figured out race. Zerg and Protoss weren't as figured out, but they finally caught up. And now that it's, you know, even in terms of people figuring out their race and what they should be doing, there's a problem when, you know, Terrans continually being nerfed. And now, it was fine pre-Queen nerf. Like, Terran still could beat Zerg. The matchup was amazing on both sides. But now, I'm about to explain why it's snowballed out of control just because of the, you know, an extra 2 range on the Queen has changed a lot. And like I said, the reason late game is so difficult, or the reason I'm going to explain now, is because you can't damage Zerg early on in the game, or even in the mid game really, because of the Queen buff. Hellions used to be able to deny creep as well as kite Queens. You know, you could attack the Queen and then run away without being shot back. So just that one little thing, that in itself takes away some from the economy. Being able to kite the Queen and then run away means that Zerg has to have some units, whether it's Speedlings, which take up larva, or roaches that also take up larva and minerals and gas. You had to have other units besides just the Queen to defend against Hellions and to get your creep spread out. The way it is now, with the Queen buff, you can only make Queens now. So what that does economically for the Zerg player is it opens up that larva that would have been spent in many Zerglings or, you know, many roaches to defend against Hellions and to allow your creep spread to get out on the map. Now that larva is going to pure drones, and the Queens are actually coming out and able to defend against the Hellions perfectly, against Banshees. You know, now it's beneficial to even make more Queens. You can just make more Queens and it doesn't hurt you at all, whereas, you know, you could do that pre-patch, but it wasn't as good. Making something that, you know, is so good that it doesn't affect you is really, it's not good. So now we have these games where the creep spread is really, you know, it's out on the map, halfway across the map at like the 14-minute mark, which is fine. It's good that creep is able to be spread, but it's too easy now. That's the thing. Way too easy. You'll hear even Korean players, DRG said, very easy, you know. TvZ very easy. Hope I get many TvZs, but you know, besides things like that, even a lot of Korean pros are also saying like, this is too strong now. We can't, you know, it's maybe we can win still, but it's just really uneven and unfair, and it is. So that's, you know, that's the one thing I really wanted to highlight about this queen buff is it makes it so much larva and minerals and gas are freed up for the Zerg player. That's the actual reason why Zergs are getting so many drones. They're able to power whatever they want. You know, but it's because of the queen. Larva that is now opened up for making drones without being able to be punished by Hellions, Hellion harass, Banshee harass. Think even, you know, even Stim Marine all-ins added in with the Overlord change. You know, they can see your whole base and figure out what you're doing. So it all snowballs, and then what that does is it lets Zerg get into the late game, quote unquote, much quicker, much, you know, unpunished. And then when it does get to the late game, as I've said before, as I said earlier in the video, nothing has really been addressed Terran late game. The Raven is essentially one of the answers to Terran late game, but it hasn't been addressed. Fungal growth still is able to shut that down pretty easily, as well as spreading your units. And the Ghost change, you know, that was the other late game, but it got nerfed. So Terran, you know, the late game is sort of more Marine, more Marauder. Throw them at your opponent and hope that you can do damage. It's much similar against Protoss, but like I said, the TvZ issue is taking the forefront in this video as well, because TvP is still winnable. You can still do damage to your opponent and stuff. TvZ, it's just unfair at this point. And you know, if these issues aren't looked at, you know, as well as the Raven for late game, like Terran needs some sort of a, you know, tiny buff late game, whether it's in the Raven Hunter Seeker range, so that you can actually get them off on Infestors or get them off on Broodlords before being fungled. Or you know, the price, maybe some price change or energy tweak. Something needs to be addressed there to actually help out Terran late game, because, and that's, you know, that's another thing that's the next point that I'm going to make here. I mentioned that Heart of the Swarm is, you know, on the horizon. It's really close to being released, and it's really, Blizzard has said that it's 99% finished, with that last 1% being the beta testing, the balance testing to tweak things. The reason that I'm making this video now, and hopefully it'll get seen by people, but the reason I'm making it is it's really important that these late game Terran issues, for especially TvZ, the reason, and you know, the queen nerf needs, or the queen buff needs to be reverted back to normal, is because if these things aren't fixed before Heart of the Swarm, if the developers feel that Heart of the Swarm is gonna, you know, magically do these things for them, it's not going to do that. Because the Heart of the Swarm units, the Warhound, the Widowmine, and what is the other one? The Warhound, Widowmine, and the Battle Hellion. You can't even think of it as a chain because it's just sort of a tweak on a unit. But those things don't actually do anything for Terran late game. Terran late game is actually the same, and luckily I can speak from the experience of playing the last beta build at MLG Anaheim. But late game Terran has nothing new in Heart of the Swarm. Nothing is addressed there. The Warhound doesn't even matter in TvZ. The Battle Hellion, it helps for mech a little bit, and the Widowmine helps a lot for mech. But Broodlord, Corruptor, and Fester is left completely unchanged for Heart of the Swarm. It's still there. Nothing has changed. Of course, when I was beta testing the game, no one was doing that because they wanted to test the new units. But the new Terran stuff has nothing. Literally nothing is done to address late game Terran issues, and that's a problem, especially because of the queen buff TvZ. You'll still be playing against, you know, people, if they're smart, they'll still be doing Broodlord, Corruptor, and Fester, and, you know, whew, it's going to be tough, guys, because nothing is added in, so something needs to be done to tweak, you know, everybody, a lot of people are pointing at the Raven, you know, that's a unit that late game Terran uses in TvT already, not in TvP because of feedback, but in TvZ, and that's okay, it doesn't have to be used TvP, but TvZ, that's like the one thing that can fight against Broodlord, Corruptor, and Fester, along with some Ghosts to EMP the Infestors, or tanks to snipe them. But, you know, as it is right now, it's almost unusable because of fungal growth, so, you know, that needs to be looked at. Heart of the Swarm, that's the point that I wanted to make here. Nothing is addressed. in terms of the late game. So I'm not mentioning too much TVP late game for Heart of the Swarm because, like I said, TvZ is taking the forefront on everything right now in terms of Terran's balance concerns because it's so, it's been so skewed to the Zerg side now that people have forgotten about TVP late game. And actually, legitimately, when I played the beta, it seems that TVP late game issues may actually be magically fixed by Heart of the Swarm, but TvZ, not so much. So, what can be done, this is my next point here, what can be done to tweak TvZ, or Terran late game in general? First off, for TvZ, they need to revert the queen change. It's a little bit past the point of, you can look at win rates all you want, but you really need to look at how people are currently playing the game at top level. I'm not even speaking of foreigners in general, but if you look at top Korean pros, look at how they're playing the game, and the queen change is just too much. It makes it also, besides being too much for Terran in general, it makes it too easy for Zerg. But the queen change alone, just that extra 2 range, that one number being tweaked in their notepad file, saving the changes or whatever, just that one change makes it so that larva is freed up for more drones. Larva doesn't need to be committed to units, and then that snowballs into a late game advantage where Zerg gets there for free, essentially, and where Terran has to have the Terran is largely based on harass and doing damage. You can still turtle, but it's not as effective. And also, Luckyful wrote a blog within the past day or two describing how another issue with the recent queen buff that it's caused, and that's the thing. Terran can theoretically play an economic defensive macro game against Zerg as well, but the thing is, it's too easy for the Zerg. The Zerg can also easily punish these 3 command center, 3 orbital builds that people are doing, including a lot of Korean players. A lot of foreigners figured it out as well, but the Zerg is able to, punish those greedy Terran builds, whereas the Terran can't exactly punish the current Zerg greedy builds in the same manner at all. You just can't punish it. So there's sort of something very unfair about that, where the Zerg is completely safe from everything, but the Terran can still be killed if the Zerg chooses to. And so that was another issue for TvZ. But once the queen change, it needs to be reverted. There needs to be that opportunity for Terran to force larva from the Zerg to be put into either roaches or speedlings, or even forcing a spine crawler that's a larva used up and a drone used up. That's less economy, less less larva. But right now you can just build a queen instead. No larva, costs the same as a spine crawler, and it has transfuse, so it actually helps them later on in the game too. So it's a snowball effect. And the queen change largely was unneeded. A lot of people agree with that. Even some Zerg programmers in the forums have said, why'd they even change the queen? That wasn't necessary. Interestingly enough, I actually agree with the speed overlord change, and this is something that Idra on the forums was, once again, you can say it's whining, but people are giving their feedback on what they think of the balance of the game, and Idra commented about it a year ago that Zerg scouting was very bad, and it was, along with Terran being so versatile they could do whatever they wanted. And now, a year later, Blizzard has they buffed the overlord speed, which is perfectly fine. That's a legitimate dynamic thing that is better for the game if scouting is more possible. But combined with the queen nerf, being able to scout everything plus be able to defend literally everything is way too much. Way too much. And that's why the current TvZ, Zerg has such a high winning percentage, and you see all these pro Zergs are beating these pro Terrans. And once again, the win rate balance is not determined by win rate, and that's something that is really disappointing from Blizzard's side, is you don't just look at win rates for balance because you're not seeing the entire picture of the actual metagame and how players are playing at that time. Right now, Zerg has an overwhelming advantage, regardless of statistics. Although if the statistics agree, that's great. That's absolutely great. So the queen change, reverting that is the first step. The second thing is things for Terran late game can actually be looked at. The Raven, it's really important, so important before Heart of the Swarm comes out that they address Terran late game issues. Whether they're going to do it for TvP, you know, that would be great and fine. Something could be looked at there for Warp Gate or whatever. But you know, they're sort of depending on Heart of the Swarm to fix those issues with the Widow Mine and the Warhound or whatever for TvP. But TvZ, all we have left is essentially the Raven, and even that is not working so well right now. So something needs to be addressed there in terms of Terran versus Zerg late game, because along with, you know, reverting the Queen, late game will still stay the same, you know, but they need to, you know, they need to look at it. All three races should be able to play a defensive macro game and be able to play into the late game without being gimped or at a disadvantage. That's not just StarCraft game design, that's RTS game design. No race should be at a disadvantage or advantage in the early game or late game. And right now I'd say the early game and mid game for all three races, you have lots of opportunities to do all-ins as well as defensive play, except for TvZ now because of the Queen buff once again. So yeah, first off, reverting the Queen change. I'm sure a lot of Terran pros, maybe even some Zerg ones, will agree with me, but it was too much, and that's the core thing, that 2 range, all that larva, it's drones now, and it's unpunishable. So the second thing, Blizzard, before Heart of the Storm comes out, can finally finalize and tweak Terran late game. Terran has been nerfed. The other races were buffed up. People don't also realize this, but Protoss and Zerg they got a little help to get up to the level of what Blizzard thought Terran was at, with the upgrade buffs, the Immortal buff to help against Terran 111, and the Zerg changes, and along with the Terran buffs. So, you know, Terran, it's long overdue. This is not it's not a reason to buff Terran. You shouldn't simply buff them because they haven't been buffed, but it's long overdue for Terran late game to be looked at, and especially TvZ, you know, some changes that could tweak it and make it even better of a matchup and a little bit more fair when it does reach the later stages of the game. And the Queen, reverting the Queen change is the biggest thing, the biggest point I would make in this video that needs to happen before Heart of the Swarm to sort of get that matchup back, you know, back even again, back into flux. And that needs to happen before Heart of the Swarm, because if it's not fixed before, then nothing's going to change in terms of the new Terran units. As a matter of fact, Zerg will actually get buffed late game for Heart of the Swarm, and buffed in other ways. So it's even more of, you know, more urgent that Terran doesn't take another, or that Blizzard doesn't take another month or two to look at Terran and then say, oh hey, we maybe fucked up that Queen chain pretty badly. They need to look at it now and, you know, make some really good decisions on it for, you know, before things get out of hand with Heart of the Swarm. Heart of the Swarm will, you know, it may magically fix TvP. They may have done some really good design there with the Widow Mine and the Warhound, possibly, even though that's a Mech Marauder. But TvZ, nothing will change, and Zerg will be more powerful in Heart of the Swarm. So will Protoss. So the late game needs to be looked at now, especially for TvZ. And the last thing I would like to address with this video is people's whining about balance whining. This video, I'm sure a lot of people will try and write off as balance whine, but the point I would like to illustrate and make for a lot of you is this stuff needs to be talked about actively, because it's a problem. If you don't talk about a problem in the game, Blizzard is not going to fix it. They're going to think it's okay and leave it as it is. But you know, when something this changing and this, like, when it makes a matchup so incredibly one-sided, people need to not be afraid to talk about it in a constructive way, or in a way that can be looked at and help the designers out in terms of balance. So, you know, hopefully a lot of pro Terrans and maybe some pro Zergs will watch this a little bit, or start discussing the changes more, because it's something that needs to be talked about and addressed. It can't be done like 2 months from now. It needs to be addressed, you know, pretty quickly, because it's getting a little bit out of control. And so that's the last thing I want to address, constructive looking, you know, when something changes a little bit too much for the worse, people need to discuss it in a constructive way, which hopefully I am, and hopefully I've outlined, you know, the problem of why it's, you know, of why it's a little bit out of control, where it's taking all that larva that would have been used up to help Zerg defend, making that so easy, less drones. That's the key issue with the queen change and why it needs to be reverted. So yeah, that's basically what this video is about. I hope you guys leave constructive comments and talk about this on the forums, and I mean, that's the key thing. I hope people talk about this and don't just, you know, don't just zip your mouth shut. If you have something constructive to add to the discussion, go ahead and do so, because you know, the balance right now is not all rainbows and puppies. It really is not. If it was, you know, that would be great, but TvZ has to be talked about right now. Every Terran Pro would love to talk about it. They're just afraid of being labeled as like, you don't know what you're doing. You need to learn how to play the game. You're balanced. No. This has to be talked about now before it sort of keeps going and nothing's done about it. So yeah. So I appreciate any comments, constructive or not. You know, at least you watched or read it or heard about this video if you are leaving a comment. So thank you. Yeah, so definitely, you know, talk about TvZ, you know, let's get Blizzard on the ball with this, otherwise it's not going to change and Heart of the Storm is going to come out and we're all going to be sitting here, wow, this we still can't win TvZ because, you know. Alright, so thank you for watching, guys. Peace. Bye-bye.